Hi, I'm Danielle. My sister's a doctor, a celebrated one. But the day I showed up pregnant, bloated, exhausted, scared, she looked me up and down and said, "Women like you don't belong here." She didn't mean the hospital. She meant the world she thought she owned. I stayed quiet. But 10 minutes later, someone walked through that door who didn't just belong. He changed everything. So, before we begin, what time are you listening to this, and where you drop it below? Because some stories, they don't start with kindness. They start with a closed door and a choice not to disappear. I walked into the clinic with one hand on my belly and the other clutching my old leather purse, the one with the worn strap and faded corners. The doorman gave me a polite nod, but I could feel the way his eyes flicked over me like he was trying to place whether I belonged here or had just wandered in the marble floors, gleamed under my boots, and the spring air still clung to my coat. It had been a long walk from the garage. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. The receptionist barely looked up when I stepped to the counter. "Name Danielle Carter," I said quietly. First appointment, her nails clacked across the keyboard. Insurance, I handed over the paperwork. My hands trembled just enough to make the clipboard slip slightly. I adjusted it quickly, pretending it hadn't happened. I wasn't nervous because of the clinic itself. It was because of who might be inside this hospital, Beacon Hill. OBGYN was elite private, and not the kind of place where people just walk in off the street. But Ethan wanted the best for the baby, and so did I. I hadn't seen my sister in 7 years. Maybe more. The last time was at our father's funeral, when she gave a speech about integrity and legacy, without once mentioning I even existed. But I was here now for my child, not for her, Danielle. A voice cut through the waiting room. I turned there. She stood. Dr. Azula Carter. My sister, she hadn't changed much. Still tall, angular, with that air of clinical superiority she wore like perfume. Her white coat was starched so sharp it looked like it could slice glass. Her stethoscope rested perfectly on her shoulders, like it had been placed there. By a stylist, her eyes scanned me from head to toe. My worn coat, my stretched shirt over my bump. The hospital form in my hand, the faintest smirk crept onto her face. "Well?" she said loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. Didn't know they were letting just anyone in now. She turned slightly toward the nurse walking beside her. Women like that are half the reason the system's falling apart. The nurse stiffened, but didn't say a word. I stayed where I was silent. My face flushed, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I gripped the handkerchief in my coat pocket, a small thing Ethan gave me stitched with my initials. My thumb traced the edge slowly. Isolde stepped closer. "Danielle," she said again this time, like it was a diagnosis. "You always had a way of showing up where you didn't belong." I glanced around. 2 patients in the waiting area. Looked over, one whispered something to her partner. The receptionist's eyes flicked between us like she wished she could disappear into the floor. I said nothing. Isolde gave a clipped nod. "Just make sure you're not expecting any special treatment. We have standards here." Then she turned on her heel and walked away, heels clicking like a metronome on tile. No one said a word. The room fell into that awkward quiet, where everyone pretends they didn't hear what they just heard. I stood there, not quite knowing what to do next. My stomach tightened, not just from the baby shifting, but from the weight of shame settling in. The receptionist finally broke the silence. "Please, just have a seat. We'll call you when we're ready." I turned slowly and sat down. My eyes found a blank spot on the wall and stayed there. 10 minutes passed. Then I heard the doors slide open again, and Ethan walked in. He didn't rush. He never did. He moved with the kind of ease that made people notice, without knowing why. His coat was dark, navy wool with clean lines and subtle tailoring. The gold watch at his wrist glinted under the overhead lights. He came straight to me, no hesitation. "Danielle," he said gently, touching my cheek. "You all right?" I nodded once, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He could read me too well. He turned to the front desk. "Excuse me, my wife was here for her check-in." The receptionist straightened immediately. "Oh, Mr. Carter, yes. Of course we didn't know. She'll be seen by the chief OB. Ethan said, his voice was low but unshakable. No residents, no interns, please cancel the current slot and reschedule under Dr. Langston. Yes, sir, right away. Isolde came back into view from around the corner. She paused mid-step. Her gaze landed on Ethan. Her face froze. He turned, finally acknowledging her, Dr. Carter. He said evenly, "Did you introduce yourself to my wife?" Isolde's mouth opened, then shut. Something flickered behind her eyes. Maybe shock, maybe fear. She turned abruptly and vanished behind the frosted glass door marked staff. Only Ethan turned back to me. "Let's get you seated somewhere more comfortable," as he guided me away. I felt something inside me shift. Not from embarrassment, not from revenge, but from the clarity of seeing it all laid bare. That hospital, that hallway, that woman who once told me I'd never amount to anything, had just shrunk into the background, and I hadn't had to raise my voice. I thought I came here for a checkup, but what I walked into was a war I didn't know. I was still part of the moment. The nurse closed the door to the private waiting lounge. I exhaled slowly. Ethan was seated beside me, one leg crossed over the other, calm as ever. His arm rested lightly behind me, not possessive. Just there, steady like a signal I wasn't alone. The room had been scrubbed clean of the earlier tension, or at least that's what the fresh flowers, soft lighting, and the faint scent of lemon tea were trying to suggest. A young receptionist came in, balancing a porcelain tray. "Mrs. Carter," she said, voice slightly too sweet. "I brought some chamomile if that's okay. We're so sorry for the earlier confusion." She didn't meet my eyes for more than a second. "Thank you," I said, quietly accepting the cup as she left. I caught my reflection in the glass wall, a tired face, a swelling belly, the slight tremble in my shoulders. I hadn't noticed until now from the outside. It might have looked like peace had returned, but inside me the storm hadn't passed. It had just taken a breath. Ethan leaned in, lowering his voice. "We don't have to stay here. I'll call Dr. Langston's office directly. We'll move everything to another clinic." I shook my head before he even finished. "No," I said, "I want her to see that I didn't run." "Not this time." He studied me for a moment, then nodded once that was one of the reasons I loved him. He never tried to bulldo my decisions, even when he disagreed. A soft knock at the door, then it opened without waiting for an answer. Isolde, she walked in like she owned the air. Her white coat swished behind her, the name badge gleaming. Dr. Isolde Carter, MD. Chief OBGYN. She wasn't smiling, and her hand was a thick manila folder, my chart. She didn't look at me, didn't greet Ethan, just marched up to the small side counter and slapped the file down like she was delivering a verdict. "You're not getting special treatment here," she said sharply. Eyes still fixed on the folder. "I've spoken with security." I set my tea down carefully and met her eyes. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I said I asked for respect." She finally looked at me. Her lip curled like I'd insulted her intellect. "You want respect," she hissed. "Try earning it." The words struck something old and bruised in me, but I kept my voice. Even Ethan didn't move. He stayed seated, watching her, silent, dangerous. Isolde crossed her arms. "She's being disruptive," she said to no one in particular, loud enough to carry outside the room. "I'm requesting she be escorted off the premises." Before the echo of her words faded, the door opened again. 2 hospital security officers stepped inside, one tall, one shorter. Both clearly uncomfortable, Ethan stayed seated. He reached into his coat, pulled out his phone, and pressed record. His voice was calm. "This is retaliation based on family history, pregnancy status, and socioeconomic bias. If you proceed, you're opening the hospital to civil rights litigation under federal law." One guard shifted his weight. The other glanced at Isolde. Uncertain, Isolde's expression didn't crack, but her jaw clenched, her fingers flexed. I stood slowly, not in surrender, but in choice. "You just made your decision, Isolde," I said. "Let's see if the board agrees." I picked up my purse, nodded once to the guards. "Don't worry, gentlemen, I can find my own way out." I turned to Ethan, expecting him to protest instead. He stood and simply offered his hand. I took it. We walked past my sister without a word. The hallway stretched before us, clinical cold humming with fluorescent lights, and judgment behind us. I could feel her glare boring into the back of my head. I didn't look back as we reached the elevator. The doors slid open, and a woman stepped out talking to a nurse about her ultrasound. She looked down at my belly, then at my face. "You okay, hun?" she asked gently. Just a stranger who had seen enough life to know when someone's been knocked down. I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, thanks." We stepped into the elevator as the doors shut. The silence wrapped around us again. A few seconds passed. Then Ethan spoke. "She doesn't deserve to be in your orbit." He said, "She's been in it all my life," I murmured. And that took me back years ago. I was 20, sitting on the edge of a twin bed in a cramped apartment textbook. Open, hands trembling. I had just told Isolde I was leaving pre-med. I wanted to pursue social work with teens. Like the ones I'd mentored that summer, she had laughed, then screamed, "You're throwing your life away for losers who won't even remember your name. You'll never matter, Danielle." She said it like a curse, and I'd believed her for a long time. The elevator doors opened. We walked through the lobby, same cold floor, same blank stairs, this time. I didn't flinch outside. The wind had picked up. Spring in Boston always came with that edge. Like winter wasn't quite ready to let go. Ethan held my coat open as I slid my arms in. "Let me drive you home," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No, I need to do this my way." He looked at me, hesitant, then nodded. "But I want her to know," I added, turning toward the glass doors of the clinic. "I didn't leave because I was afraid. I left because I've outgrown this." We stood in silence for a beat. Then he kissed my forehead as I stepped away. I placed my hand gently on my belly. "We are not weak," I whispered. "We are not what they say." And I kept walking, no tears, no backward glance, just a quiet resolve settling into my bones. She tried to erase me like she always had, but this time I was walking away with everything she could never take. The air outside the hospital had tasted different when I walked through those sliding doors yesterday. Sharp, cold, but clean, like I'd finally stepped out of someone else's story and into my own. I didn't say much on the way home. Ethan didn't push. He just held my hand, while driving his thumb gently brushing mine every few minutes, like he was checking if I was still here, still steady. But all night I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, from instinct. Something about the way Isolde stood, so smug, so sure, with security at her back. It told me that wasn't the end of it. That was just her first move. So when the sun broke through the curtains this morning, I was already sitting at the edge of our bed. I had one hand on my stomach, the other gripping the comforter, like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. Ethan stirred beside me. "You okay? I just need to move, clear my head." He nodded already, knowing I wouldn't. I padded barefoot into the living room, wrapped in my old gray robe, and sat cross-legged on the mat I use when I pretend I know how to meditate. I tried, closed my eyes, counted my breaths, but all I saw was her face, not angry, not loud, just calculating. I gave up, stood and went straight to the desk in the corner. My laptop opened with a low hum. I typed in my login for the hospital's patient portal just to begin the transfer process to the new clinic. Ethan's colleague had recommended it should have taken 2 minutes. Click download forward. But when the file loaded, I froze there, in plain black text under my name were words I had never seen. Patient marked as non-compliant, history of missed appointments, evidence of potential substance use, unstable housing, possible psychiatric flags, recommend further social work review. For a long second, I just stared at the screen. Then I blinked. Scrolled, read it again and again. What was this? I hadn't missed a single prenatal appointment. I didn't even drink coffee anymore, let alone touch anything stronger. My records were clean. Always had been. An unstable housing. I lived in a fully paid home in Cambridge with my husband, a tenure faculty member. This was a lie. A bold, intentional, dangerous lie. I felt my chest tighten. I opened the file, history timestamps of recent edits. One entry stood out, made less than 12 hours ago. The user ID wasn't visible, but the access had been overridden from the attending physician portal. I scrambled to print it, My fingers fumbled with the mouse. I started saving backups. PDFs, screenshots, timestamps. Footsteps came down the hall. Ethan appeared in the doorway, towel still around his shoulders. "You're up early." I turned the screen toward him. He took one look and dropped the towel. His eyes didn't blink once as he read, This is not a mistake." He said low and cold, "She's trying to get you flagged." I knotted my throat tight. If this gets sent to CPS after the birth, they could question my ability to parent. I could lose time with the baby, or worse. She wanted you out of the building yesterday so she could rewrite your file without you knowing. Get ahead of it. I sat back, feeling the pressure behind my eyes rise. Not tears, focus. "This isn't about me anymore." I said, "This is about our child." She crossed a line. Ethan stepped out and came back with his laptop. "We need help now." He called Marcus Browning, an attorney. We both knew quiet, sharp, and not easily intimidated within minutes. Marcus was on video chat, asking for everything I could pull. I showed him the printed records, the original file from my last appointment, and the altered version. He didn't speak for a full minute. "Then she accessed your file after her privileges were revoked. That's tampering, and it's illegal, but someone must have given her override credentials. She didn't do this alone." My stomach dropped. I looked at Ethan. "So she's got help in that hospital." He nodded, "and maybe higher than we think." I stood. "Then we don't wait for it to escalate. We go now." He paused. "You sure I'm not walking into that building as a patient this time?" I said, "I'm walking in as someone who's been harmed, and I'm leaving a trail." The drive to the hospital was different this time. No silence, no dread, just quiet purpose. I had my folder on my lap the whole way. Every page in place, every copy printed in triplicate. We didn't park in the main lot. We used the side entrance for staff and administrative visitors. Ethan led us down a separate hallway, straight to the Office of Medical Ethics. The woman at the front desk looked up, recognized Ethan, then saw me. Her expression shifted, not surprised, nervous. "I need to speak with your officer on duty." I said, my voice was even not loud, "regarding a formal report." "Of course," she said quickly, rising. "Give me just a moment." Within minutes, I was sitting across from a gray-haired man named Dr. Levins. I placed the folder between us. "I believe my medical file has been tampered with by a physician who also happens to be my sister." He didn't interrupt. He just opened the folder and started reading. I let him sit in silence, let the weight of the words and paper do the talking. Finally, he looked up. "You realize this is a very serious allegation." "I do," I replied. "That's why I brought proof outside the office." I heard voices, a laugh familiar when I stepped out. I saw her, Isolde, leaning against the wall, chatting with a senior administrator. Like she had nothing in the world to worry about. Her head turned, her eyes met mine. For the first time in a long, long while, she blinked. First, I didn't say a word. Didn't flinch. Not anymore. She tried to rewrite my chart, like she'd rewritten my worth for years. But this time, the paper trail leads to her. For a long moment, I just sat in the car engine off, holding the folder on my lap like it might combust. The hallway confrontation hadn't happened. Isa never turned her head. But the silence between us across 20 ft of polished tile said everything she knew, and I knew she knew. By the time I got home, Ethan was already at his laptop, halfway through an email to his contact at the medical board. I didn't interrupt. I just slid the folder across the table and said, "We start here." He nodded, once the kind of nod that didn't mean agreement, it meant war. The next morning, I woke early to an alert on my phone. "Your complaint is under review. We appreciate your patience. It wasn't even signed by a human being. Just a timestamp and a faceless office title, Cambridge Memorial Ethics Oversight Committee." I showed the message to Ethan while pouring my tea. He read it, sighed, and muttered, "That's how they do it. Delay until you're tired. Delay until you go away." I stirred my tea slowly. "Not this time." He looked up at me, steady. "No, not this time." The quiet stretched between us, thick with the same kind of tension I used to feel right before walking into an exam I hadn't studied for. Except now it wasn't my grade on the line. It was my child's safety, my dignity, and apparently the stories of women I hadn't even met yet. By mid-morning, I logged into a private patient rights forum, a small online community I joined when I first got pregnant and wanted to learn about VBAC safety. I hadn't posted in weeks, but now curiosity made me check the inbox. I'd long forgotten there. It was private message from Selena J. I clicked. Her message was short. I saw your post. Dr. Isolde Carter misdiagnosed me during my pregnancy. She nearly cost me everything. They buried it. I'm sorry you're going through this. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I blinked, read it again, then again. There was no tone of vengeance, no caps, lock fury, no screaming emojis, just quiet. Knowing that hit harder than anything else, I typed back, "Would you be open to meeting for coffee, somewhere near the hospital?" Her reply came 10 minutes later. "Yes, there's a quiet place on South Main across from the garden entrance. I'll be there around 2 if that works." At 1:45, I was already seated trying to look relaxed while scanning every woman who walked through the cafe door. Selena walked in like someone who had learned not to draw attention. Tote bag tucked under one arm's shoulders. Slightly forward, gaze scanning but not lingering, but when she saw me she smiled gently and nodded. We ordered drinks. No small talk. She sat across from me, pulled out a folder, not unlike mine, and opened it. "I don't know how much you've heard about her," she said. "Tone even, but your sister, she's careful. She documents things in ways that can't be legally proven wrong unless you know what you're looking for." I nodded. Not yet speaking. She slid a page forward, ultrasound note, circled, comment, patient, advised, bed rest. Disregarded instruction, possibly due to cultural attitude toward compliance. That line almost got CPS involved when my son was born. Underweight, she said. I stared at the paper. The language clinical passive was like a scalpel dressed in velvet. It didn't scream harm. It suggested enough to plant doubt. She showed me another patient presence with signs of excessive weight gain. May require intervention, possibly dietary non-compliance. I had preeclampsia, Selena said. She said it was poor nutrition and my body type. I looked up. "Did you file a complaint?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. 3 of us did. 2 were bought off with NDAs. I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I left it. Her voice shook, then steadied. "She brings in millions in grants. They won't touch her." I exhaled slowly so they protect her. Selena nodded because she gives them prestige. She's a Carter. She's their golden goose in a lab coat. Something inside me cracked quietly, not loud enough to show, but sharp enough to cut. I whispered. They said the same thing when I was 10. When she stole my science fair project, and my parents told me not to make a scene. Selena didn't blink. They said, "Don't embarrass the family as old as going places." We sat there in that hush-shared silence between 2 women who had learned the same rule the hard way. When powerful people hurt you, the world tells you to take it quietly. Smile, move on, don't rock the boat. But I was done floating. "I'm going to take this further," I said, folding her papers back gently but not through the front door. "I want them to feel it coming before it hits." Selena tilted her head. "You're not scared, terrified." I said honestly, "But my daughter is worth more than their silence." By the time I got home, I already had 3 more messages waiting, one from a woman in DC, another from Florida, all Black, all mothers, all with stories that smelled of the same rot-coded language. False annotations, ignored symptoms. I didn't go to bed that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a legal pad beside me. I made categories, dates, terminology, copy-pasted screenshots, and scanned records. Each testimony landed like a brick. Each woman a mirror held up to my own experience. Ethan brought me tea around midnight. He watched for a moment, then said, "You want me to talk to Leonard at the ACLU?" Quietly, I looked at him. "Not yet. I want them to sweat first. I want to let their silence work against them for once." He nodded and left me to it by dawn. I'd created a binder nearly 2 in thick. I printed, sorted, labeled. The final document was a weight in my hands. Not just in pages, but in history. The kind of history they like to hide behind policy statements and shiny brochures. I slipped the binder into my bag and walked to the window outside. The city was still waking up, but something in me had already risen. "Tell me again, Isolde," I whispered. Fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. "Who doesn't belong here?" She thought I was alone, but I wasn't the only one with scars, and I was done staying silent. 3 days after that cafe meeting with Selena, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed, the screen lit up with her name. "There's a patient advocacy forum next weekend." She said, Atlanta, small but serious. "We need more voices, your voice." My hand hovered over a pair of Ethan's folded socks. Speaking in public had never been my strength. Writing, yes, researching, yes. But standing in front of strangers, vulnerable, exposed. That was a different kind of battlefield. I paused. Picturing Isolde's face the last time I saw her, sharp, smug, so sure of her place above me, I took a breath. "I'll do it." Selena's exhale was soft. "You won't regret it." The rest of the week passed in a strange mix of nerves and resolve. I sat at our kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a laptop, open, flipping between medical journals, news reports, and handwritten memories. I didn't want to make this about emotion alone. It had to be more than that. More than a story. It had to be a truth they couldn't erase. I found statistics I already knew in my bones, but seeing them on paper still burned. Black women in America were 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women, and those numbers barely scratched the surface of what happened when they weren't believed. When doctors like Isolde made decisions with arrogance instead of care. Ethan came in from a walk, set a bottle of water beside me, and said nothing. Just stood there, hand on my shoulder, steady like always. I want to say it right. I told him, "You will." I spent hours rewriting a single paragraph. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew the weight of what I was about to put out into the world. There's a difference between whispering your pain to one person and standing up to speak it into a room full of strangers. The day of the forum arrived with overcast skies and that soft, southern humidity that clings to the skin like memory. Ethan drove me to the public library where the event was being held. One of those clean, quiet buildings with polished floors and folding chairs set up in the meeting room. "Want me to stay in the car?" he asked gently. "No." I said, "Sit in the back, just be there." The room filled slowly. Most were women, some with babies and strollers, some in scrubs coming straight off a shift. A few older men sat respectfully beside their wives. The quiet murmur of nervous voices, paper programs, rustling, someone coughing softly into a sleeve. It all settled around me as I took my seat in the 3rd row, waiting for my name to be called. When it was, I stood. My legs didn't shake, but my hands did. I walked up to the front, adjusted the mic like the volunteer had shown me, and looked out. "My name is Danielle," I began. "And I'm here because I wasn't believed." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the heavy listening kind. The kind you only get when people recognize something in themselves. I filed a complaint after my prenatal records were altered by someone I trusted. Someone who also happens to be my sister. But this isn't just about family. It's about a system that protects the powerful and punishes the rest of us for speaking up. A woman near the back gave a single nod. I kept going, voice trembling. Once then, evening out, I spoke about the day I was told I didn't look like I belonged in a maternity wing. About the note that had been added to my file, labeling me as emotionally unstable after I questioned the treatment I received. I recited the statistics I'd highlighted in red. I held up a copy of my altered chart. But more than anything, I said, I'm here because I was told, not just by doctors, but by my own family, that people like me don't belong in rooms like this. That motherhood, justice, truth were not mine to claim. I looked out at the rows of faces, some watching intently, others with heads bowed, and then I closed with one final sentence, my voice clear. They were wrong when I stepped down. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I walked back to my seat, breathing slow after the event. As chairs scraped and people stood to leave, a woman approached me quietly. She wore pale blue scrubs and a hospital badge turned backward. You were brave, she said almost in a whisper. I nodded, unsure what to say. I worked under Dr. Old Carter for 2 years. She added, glancing around. You're right, there were incidents. They always swept it under the rug. My breath caught. Would you be willing to talk to someone? She hesitated, then nodded. Off the record for now. I gave her my number, and she scribbled hers on the back of a receipt. No names, just trust, tender and cautious. On the drive home, the sky had turned soft pink. I leaned back in the passenger seat, exhausted but awake in a new way. Ethan didn't speak, but when we pulled into the driveway, he reached over and took my hand later that evening. Once the house had settled into quiet again, I walked to the bookshelf and slid the manila folder from between 2 novels inside. Were copies of my medical records, the complaint I filed, and a growing list of women like Selena. I placed a USB beside it, the forum recording on it, voice, slightly shaky but strong. I didn't smile out of pride. It wasn't about that anymore. I smiled because I could finally breathe. Because for the first time, this wasn't just about proving someone wrong. It was about building something better that day. I didn't just tell my story. I planted a flag where they said I didn't belong, and others were already marching toward it the night after the forum. I hardly slept, not from nerves, but something sharper, something clearer. Like my bones knew before I did that, the next morning would bring change. And it did at 8:07 a.m. Just as I finished pouring a cup of tea, a firm knock echoed through our hallway. Not rushed, not angry, just precise. I walked to the door, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe Selena dropping off extra flyers from the event. Instead, 3 people stood there in dark suits. 2 women, 1 man, all with crisp identification already extended. Danielle Morin. The man asked. His voice was direct but not unkind. Yes, we're with the Office for Civil Rights. We'd like a moment of your time. This is regarding a formal complaint filed by the Federal Division of Equal Access, initiated by documentation submitted from an internal channel linked to the Department of Veterans Affairs. I stared at them for a second. The words didn't quite register. You mean this is real, the older of the 2? Women gave a quiet nod. Ma'am, it's always been real. They just didn't expect you to fight back behind me. Ethan stepped forward in jeans and a t-shirt, holding our son's sippy cup in one hand. His face didn't flinch. Come in, I said, moving aside. They didn't stay long, just long enough to confirm my identity, verify the files, and hand me an official summon to a briefing downtown. The woman, Agent Calloway, told me gently, what you gave us, it triggered an automatic compliance review. Your husband's submission helped open a protected channel, but your testimony will determine how deep this goes. We left the house an hour later. The federal building wasn't far, but I felt like I was stepping into another world. A quiet, humming room with whiteboards already half-filled, a wall-sized timeline, stretched from ceiling to floor with printouts of schedules, audit logs, and chart codes pinned like battle plans. One of the agents nodded toward it. This is Dr. Aolda Carter's access history. She signed off on 2 separate discharge charts for a single patient under different aliases. I blinked. Wait, what? She overrode protocol. Then logged another physician's initials to approve the same form. She did this 6 times, and not just on you. They gave me space to speak, and I did for almost 2 hours, everything down to how I felt when my sister looked at my swollen belly and said, "Women like you don't belong here." I included the dates I was dismissed, the missed blood work, the falsified results. I watched them take it in silently, methodically. After I finished, I leaned back, my hands cold, despite the warm room. How far does this go? I finally asked. Agent Calloway tapped her pen on a red tab near the edge of the whiteboard. That's what we intend to find out by mid-afternoon. They moved fast. Ethan dropped me back at the house, but the agents drove straight to St. Catherine Memorial. I wasn't permitted to join them, standard protocol, but I stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching as the same glass doors that once dismissed me now opened for a federal order. HR showed up, compliance officers trickled in from side exits. I could see the head of OBGYN pacing behind the tinted lobby, glass arms crossed and jaw tight, and then her Isolde. She stepped into the lobby in a beige coat, hair pulled tight, phone to her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her mouth move, sharp clip demanding she turned. Toward the doors, her eyes landed on me for a moment. Her expression blanked, then stiffened. I didn't move, didn't wave. I simply stood there, one hand resting across my stomach. You see me now, don't you? When I got home, the silence inside felt louder than before. Ethan was at the kitchen table, typing steadily, half listening to a podcast. The mail sat on the counter. I sorted through it out of habit. Junk flyers, a water bill, a manila envelope. No name, no return address. I opened it inside a single piece of paper printed in block letters, dropped the complaint or regret it. No signature, just that I set it down slowly and called Ethan over. He read it, then he walked to the office, pulled out his laptop, and opened an encrypted reporting interface without a word. He uploaded the scanned note, flagged it as a threat, and copied it into 3 channels: legal security and federal liaison. He looked at me. Let them come. He said, "You're not standing alone in this." That night, I barely touched my food, but I wasn't afraid. Just awake in a way that didn't let me blink too long without replaying every moment of the day around 10 p.m. Mai stood by the window. The house was quiet. Our son had long since fallen asleep. The porch light cast a soft halo on the front lawn. My phone buzzed once, then again. 2 new messages. The first was from an anonymous number. I was in the delivery room that day. I saw what she did. I'm willing to talk off the record, please. The second followed a minute later. I worked in records. There's a pattern. I've saved some of it. I stared at the screen, letting the messages sink in. A warmth rose in my chest. Not fire this time, not rage. Something steadier. Hope they thought I was one voice, but it's a choir now. And we weren't whispering anymore for every lie they buried. I brought back a voice, and the silence was starting to break that morning. The air was oddly still, no wind. No birdsong. Just the low hum of traffic far in the distance, as Ethan pulled into the narrow lot outside the Federal Mediation Center. I rested my hand over my belly. Breathing deep, 2 weeks had passed since the agents had stood on my porch, but the storm that followed still hadn't calmed today. Wasn't about anger anymore. It was about proof truth, lined up on paper and sworn under oath. I stepped out of the car slowly. Ethan didn't say anything, but his hand hovered near my lower back. Steady the closer we walked to the glass doors. The more the weight in my chest shifted. Not heavier, just different, focused at the receptionist desk. We gave our names. She nodded, then buzzed us in with a quiet "Room 4A, left hallway, 3rd door, you're expected." And just like that, I was walking toward the room where my sister would be answering questions she never thought anyone would ask. When I entered, I saw her. Isolda sat at the long table in a charcoal blazer, hands folded on a yellow legal pad. No lab coat, no badge. Her posture was upright, chin slightly raised. But when her eyes met mine, something flickered. Not superiority, not even contempt, just hesitation. She looked away. First, funny how people used to say, power walked into a room with its head high, commanding presence, but power, real power, didn't always wear heels or speak over others. Sometimes it walked in quietly, held its ground, and let the truth do the talking. The lead federal observer, Ms. Alvarez, gestured to the seat across from Isolda. I sat. Ethan stood behind me, our attorney next to him. 2 hospital attorneys flanked Isolda, one of them already thumbing through a folder, like it might save her. And Ms. Alvarez's voice was calm, but clear. This is a formal deposition under federal protection. All responses are on record per agreement. Miss Danielle Carter has given consent to be present for all testimony concerning her case. Miss Carter, thank you for attending. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. She turned to Isolda, Dr. Isolda Jennings. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Isolda's lips pressed thin. I do. The questioning started plainly enough: her role, her credentials, her access privileges in the patient record system. And then came the first break in the line. Dr. Jennings, on the following dates. Did you alter any medical records associated with patient Danielle Carter? Isolda leaned forward, eyes narrowing. I reviewed records. Yes, standard process. Sometimes the system logs. access in odd ways. We've had issues with that before. Did you override entries previously signed by other staff? I can't say for sure, possibly, but I wouldn't call it override. It's often a matter of correcting for clarity. My attorney slid a paper across the table. A log timestamps my patient ID, her login credentials, direct alterations twice. 2 entries rewritten 23 minutes apart, silence. Then I don't recall those exact edits. Her voice cracked on recall. Ms. Alvarez didn't flinch. Please note, Exhibit B entered into record. Next came my turn. I opened my folder, slowly reading aloud into the mic on the table. This was not just a matter of misplaced paperwork or back-end errors. This was about a pattern of erasure, of dismissal, of assuming a woman like me, pregnant, working class, without a pedigree, could be adjusted out of the system. When inconvenient, I looked directly at Isolde. She didn't look back. I remember everything, the cold tone, the missing labs, the gaslighting you told me. I was dramatic, overreacting. But now the system shows who was really editing the truth. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to miss. Alvarez nodded without emotion. Entered into record, I paused before continuing. There's more than one chart, and more than one woman. I won't name them. But you know who they are. The ones who got rushed through, ignored, who didn't have anyone to fight for them until now. Isolde's attorney leaned in to whisper something. Her hand started to tremble, just slightly. We request a recess, her counsel said abruptly. 15 minutes, Ms. Alvarez replied without looking up. Request noted, denied. Please proceed. Isolde blinked hard. Her jaw clenched, then unclenched, and in that moment, I remembered another room, another Audience College junior year scholarship award. Banquet. I just won a full tuition grant after 2 years of night school. My GED framed on my dorm wall, like it meant something. Isolde, standing next to the dean, said into a hot mic, Imagine that, a GED girl making the list. What next? Fast food workers teaching biochem. The room had laughed. I had smiled, but not this time. I didn't flinch now. I held her gaze until she broke it. After the final questions, the room emptied slowly. Her attorneys gathered their files with movements that were just a little too fast, like they couldn't wait to leave. I stood without speaking. Isolde never turned around outside. The sun had dipped low, painting the sidewalks gold. Ethan walked a few steps ahead to pull the car around as I stepped out onto the pavement. A young woman stood near the edge of the ramp. She looked maybe 24, nervous smile, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Carter, yes, I watched your statement at the forum online. You probably don't remember. But I was in the room when they gave your sister the promotion. I was just an intern. I tilted my head slightly, curious. I changed my specialty because of you women's health. I thought maybe I could do something about it too. I stared at her for a beat, then gave her a nod. Not big, not dramatic, just enough. Then it was worth it? She smiled like she was about to say more, but just nodded and turned away. I looked out across the parking lot toward the fading sun. My hand slid over my belly again, and for the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel like it was closing in. It felt like it was listening. The mask cracked today, and what hid underneath wasn't strength. It was fear of being seen. That line echoed in my head the next morning as I poured myself a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. Ethan had already stepped out to meet with Eagle. The sunlight coming through the kitchen window felt soft, even, kind, but what waited on my phone screen wasn't the headline, hit me before the coffee even touched my lips. Horizon Medical Center launches. Diversity, Fellowship, and Equity Task Force. I blinked, scrolled, read again. No mention of misconduct. No acknowledgement of the federal investigation. Nothing about Isolde or the women she ignored. Nothing about what happened to me. They tried to drown the truth in a pool of buzzwords. By the time I reached the end of the article, my fingers were trembling. Not from surprise, but from the same cold recognition I'd carried all my life. When power gets scared, it doesn't apologize. It distracts. It recasts the villain as visionary, and this time they thought they could paint Over bloodstains with a press release. A soft chime buzzed from my phone. I checked the notification and froze. Anonymous. Not everything you survive makes you a hero. Some folks just like attention, another ping, then another stay in your lane. You'll ruin everything for real victims. You should have stayed quiet. You were safer that way. The bile in my stomach rose with each one. I walked into the living room and set the phone down like it was something rotting. The room felt smaller, the air tighter. It wasn't just institutional spin, now it was personal. By the time Ethan walked through the door, an hour later, I had already printed the headline. It lay on the table highlighted in red ink, beside screenshots of the messages. He studied the pile quietly, then looked up. "This is the pushback," he said simply. "Stay calm, but don't stay quiet." I nodded. I didn't feel calm, but I wasn't staying quiet either that afternoon. Selena called. Her voice was urgent, focused. She had reached out to the National Coalition for Black Maternal Health. They had reviewed my deposition, the hospital logs, the records. "They want to talk to you," she said. "And they want to post something, a breakdown of the cover-up with your permission." I agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, the post was up behind the glossy PR campaign as a woman who was nearly erased and lived to expose it. It included timelines, names, not just mine, stories from other women former staff who had quietly left Horizon. It laid bare a pattern, not an accident by evening. The post had been shared thousands of times. Friends from high school I hadn't heard from in decades sent messages. One just said, "I always knew you'd burn the place down in the best way." Still, part of me braced for silence, but the next day I passed the hospital on my way to the co-op and saw them, 5 women standing just outside the hospital's front awning. Homemade signs in their hands. "We believe Danielle. No more silence. No more excuses. Pain ignored is pain multiplied." I slowed my steps, my breath caught in my throat. A young woman in scrubs stepped up to a mic they'd set up near the sidewalk. Her voice was quiet but steady. I was a patient of Dr. Carter's too. She said she dismissed everything I said, told me I was exaggerating, that I was just hormonal. I believed her until now. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. They weren't doing it for a thank you. They were doing it because something had cracked open and it couldn't be sealed again that night. As I was folding laundry in the living room, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Danielle, I knew the voice before she said her name. It was flat tired, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "I'm suspended," Isolde said. "Pending review. Are you happy now?" I stood still, let her words hang for a second. "No," I said, "I'm not happy, Isolde. I'm awake, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." She didn't reply, just a click, then silence. I sat back on the couch and closed my eyes. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like oxygen. Later that week, Selena suggested we hold a live Q&A, nothing scripted. No lawyers, just me, my story, and a screen full of strangers, some angry, some grieving, some just listening. The night of the live stream, I lit a candle on the desk beside me just for steadiness. I adjusted the mic, took one long breath. More than 3,000 people joined. Some asked about the deposition, others asked how I kept going. One woman just typed, "I thought it was just me. Thank you." I answered as best I could, not like a teacher, not like a survivor, just a person who got tired of being silenced. Toward the end, someone asked, "What would you say to the woman you were 5 years ago?" I paused. Then I said slowly, "I used to think silence kept me safe, but silence just made them louder." The chat box flooded with hearts and comments. I ended the stream and sat there staring at the dark screen. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hiding in the institution. It was scrambling. The louder I spoke, the more they scrambled, and the more I realized they were never invincible. 3 months later, I still wake early, not because of worry, but because my body finally trusts. It's safe enough to rest and wake without dread. The house was quiet that morning. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft buzz from the baby monitor perched beside my coffee cup. I pulled the thick manila envelope across the kitchen table. My name was printed clean and centered on the front. No dear Ms., no sugar coating inside. Was the Final federal review from the Maternal Health Oversight Commission. I opened it, and for the first time in a long time, I read out loud. Not for anyone else, just for me. Findings consistent, patterns of negligent care, failure to follow emergency protocol, documented racial bias indicators. My voice didn't shake my hands, didn't either. I read each word like I was unsealing something sacred. Recommendation, Dr. Isolde Hayes. Indefinite suspension, pending full disciplinary review. I closed the file, looked out the window. The morning light spilled onto the floor like a quiet kind of justice, not flashy, not loud, but real. A few hours later, I opened the mailbox amid coupons and catalogues. There was one handwritten envelope. Georgia postmark, neat looping handwriting inside was a single page. I saw your live stream. It began. I lost my daughter in childbirth. 2 years ago, same hospital system, same excuses, same silence. But then I saw your face. You made it. You spoke. Thank you for not letting them bury us, for reminding. The world we existed there was no name. Just a mother who still cries. I held that letter against my chest for a long time. Then I cried too. But not the same tears I used to cry, the ones that hid in bathroom stalls or ran down behind closed bedroom doors. These were tears of something else Pride Relief witnessed that weekend. I flew to D.C. for the National Maternal Health Summit. No title next to my name, no microphone waiting backstage, just a panel chair with my name spelled right. And a room full of people who didn't look through me. I stood without notes, without a script, just truth. I was once called a mistake. That's what my sister said standing in a hospital hallway while I was carrying life inside me. I was called too loud, too dramatic, too poor, too black, too much. But I stayed and I kept speaking. Not because I wanted revenge, because I didn't want another woman anywhere to have to prove her pain to be believed. Silence, then hands clapping. Not for the drama, but for the clarity. The next day back. Home, Ethan switched on the living room TV. There she was, Isolde. Her eyes were tired, hair still pristine, press conference mic in front of her. She didn't say my name, didn't say sorry, just one line. I need time to reflect. I watched her for a few seconds, then reached for the remote and turned it off. There's the mirror, as I said softly, to no one in particular. Let it reflect what you did later that evening. I rocked my daughter in my arms. She was growing fast. Already looking at me with the same determined stare Ethan had. We hadn't spoken her name publicly, not yet. But as I held her, I whispered it gently into the soft folds of her blanket, like a blessing, like a promise. Hope Everlyn Carter, not named after the pain. Not for the battles, named for what made it through. A few weeks after that, I returned to Horizon Medical, not as a patient, not as someone fighting to be seen, but as a member of the hospital's new maternal health review board. Same sliding doors, same smell of antiseptic and waxed floors, but something was different. People nodded at me as I passed, not out of pity, not out of fear, but recognition. Respect. At the elevator, a young nurse reached for the button, then held the door open without hesitation. I walked in alone, unafraid. There's a difference between being let in and walking in because you earned your place. I don't knock anymore. Sometimes justice isn't a loud slam, it's a quiet door opening because you refuse to disappear.